develop our understanding of what Christ's death on the cross really means for us. We'll talk about that some more in a minute too. Ignatius also addresses an issue called ecclesiology. This is a study of the church, the study of the makeup of the church. He was one of the first ones to formally assert that there should be a single bishop in charge of a diocese, which is generally a single city or a single area. You can't have more than one bishop. There's only one. And he is the one that is in charge of that particular diocese, which is generally a city. He also is the first one that we know of who wrote of the church as being universal. He was the first one that used the Greek word katholikos, which means universal, which we translate into English as Catholic. Now, as a former Anglican, we used to always, I don't know if anybody have been an Anglican, know anything about the Anglican Church or the Episcopal Church. Okay, the Anglican Church uses the Nicene Creed. Exactly the same, virtually the same version that we use in the Catholic Church. To the point where, in that part where we say we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, every Anglican in the world, every Sunday, says we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Now, you might say, wait a minute. Hang on, how's that? Well, we used to always joke in the Anglican Church, yeah, that's small c Catholic, which means universal. We believe in the universal church that has its origins in Jesus Christ. That there is one church that Jesus Christ established. And that was probably one of the reasons why eventually I kept looking at that and going in my head as I was saying it, even as a priest, I was capitalizing the C. So, yeah, that's that's a whole nother story. One of the things that is particularly indicative of these first three fathers that we're talking about here is how interrelated they are. We're getting ready to talk about Polycarp. Well, Ignatius, in his writings, actually talks about Polycarp himself. Ignatius and Polycarp knew each other. And this is significant because it shows the interrelated character of these fathers, sometimes from very different parts of the world, that were writing to each other and they were learning from each other. They were interacting with each other. So, Polycarp of Smyrna died in the year 155, approximately. By the way, Ignatius of Antioch, I kind of threw this out there and didn't go back to it, was martyred. He was actually transported from Antioch to Rome and was martyred in Rome, which is kind of a unique thing. Usually that didn't happen. Usually they were martyred wherever they were from. Yes.
Excuse me. Which one was the apostle of John? Was it? I've heard the one with Polycarp or.
That was Ignatius. Wait a minute. Let me see. Hang on. That was Polycarp. Sorry. Okay. Yes, I had to check my notes. Yes, we're getting ready to talk about that.
Okay.
Don't step on. Sorry. Don't bury my lead, Ryan. Come on.
Ask questions, but not that one.
Yeah, don't ask that one. No, it's a good question. Polycarp of Smyrna died roughly around 155. Polycarp is the Greek, translated from the Greek, it means roughly much fruit, just in case you were interested. If that ever comes up. If you're watching Jeopardy, and there you go. He was a bishop of Smyrna. He was also martyred for the faith, and he was a disciple of John the Apostle. Now, as y'all probably know, John was the only apostle who was not martyred. John was the only apostle that died a natural death. He was the youngest of the apostles, and so he lived the longest. I believe it's generally believed that he died somewhere around 90 AD or so. Yes?
What does martyr mean?
Martyr means that you are killed for your faith.
Oh.
Very literally, killed for your faith. Yes. Let me talk about Polycarp, and then we'll talk a little bit more about why some of these folks were martyred. Okay. He learned at the feet of John the Apostle. So this is one of the connection points that we have between those original 12, the 12 who actually studied at the feet of Jesus, who spent the most time with Jesus as he ministered, as he taught. And in turn, as they went out and they taught, then they were teaching people like Polycarp. And they were raising up people like Polycarp all over the ancient world. Polycarp was a correspondent with Ignatius. We talked about all that. Polycarp is probably best known for imparting, for carrying on what he learned from John, which, because of John's connection, by the way, with the Blessed Virgin Mary, also gave Polycarp an insight into her character and her nature, because he was able to hear firsthand from John who Mary was and what she was like.
So why did tell us a little bit more about that connection to Mary? Not everybody might know that.
Okay, at the foot of the cross, as Jesus was dying, what did he say to John the apostle whom he beloved?
Here's your mother.
Here is your mother. And to Mary, he said, here is your son. So in this, Jesus is fulfilling his obligation to his mother, making sure that she has somebody who is going to take care of her after he is gone. That connection between John and Mary is, according to tradition, lasted through the end of Mary's life. And we don't know, at least I don't know, exactly when Mary died. Well, take a step back. Mary didn't die, sorry. That's another conversation. When Mary was assumed into heaven, that probably happened somewhere in the area of Asia Minor, around the city of Ephesus, because that's traditionally where John and Mary lived up until the end of her earthly life. Let me put it that way. So that connection is a key connection that is carried forward from the apostles to the early church. Okay? Does that answer your question without me going into another rabbit trail too far? Okay.
Wasn't there
Here's
a
another rabbit trail.
statement, Christ's statement from the cross, here's your mother?
Yeah.
Don't we sort of consider there being a broader implication with that, as in John representing the church, and here is your mother, here's the mother of the church type of thing?
Yeah, I would say so. Yes. That's an easy answer.
Which is another reason we have such a veneration for her.
Yes, yeah. And there'll be another class that will talk about Mary and her, the importance that Mary is to the church. So I don't really want to get too far into that. Okay, so, and just so that y'all know too, again, to help set the context a little bit, I probably should have done this at the beginning, a little bit of a timeline of church history. The Council of Jerusalem, which is described in the Acts of the Apostles, the meeting of the apostles and Paul, where they made some really important decisions about how they were going to go about the job that Jesus had given them. That happened in the year 48, approximately. Paul wrote his letter to the Romans in approximately the year 57 AD. Peter and Paul were both martyred in Rome approximately 65, 66 AD, something like that. Again, John probably died somewhere in the neighborhood of about 90 AD. And Polycarp was martyred in and around 155 AD. So there's that kind of helps, I think, to set the context a little bit. And historically, let's remember too, geographically, we're talking about the first 100 years of the Christian era, what we call Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. This is the height of the power and the majesty and the extent of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire covers the known world from east to west, north to south. This is a period of time that is often called the Pax Romana, which means it's the peace of Rome. The world at that time is actually very peaceful. You probably heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome. The Romans were great about building roads. Everywhere they went, they built a road. So that it was very easy to travel, well, for them, it was very easy to travel from all of the different places of the Roman Empire back to its center, which was Rome. The Roman emperor was the power and authority in the world. Now, the Roman emperor at the time of Jesus' death was Tiberius. He was the last, I believe this is accurate, he was the last Roman emperor to be deified after his death. Now, it was a common practice for the Roman emperors to be declared a god after they died. Well, the first two, actually, I guess, when you really get down to it. Because the third Roman emperor was a fellow you probably have heard of. His name was Caligula. Not a very nice guy. One of the things that Caligula did was declare himself a god while he was still alive. It became a common occurrence after that for the Roman emperor to be considered a god because he was the emperor. Now that's important because as a part of being a Roman citizen, it was expected that you would worship the emperor as one of the pantheon of gods that existed in Rome at the time. If you lived in the Roman Empire, even if you weren't a citizen, you were expected to worship that pantheon of gods, which included the Roman emperor. I believe this is accurate. The first persecution of the Christians, widespread persecution of the Christians, occurred under the Emperor Trajan in approximately 98. Well, he was emperor from 98 to 117 AD. Now, I say widespread because I'm not talking about Nero here. You probably have heard about the Emperor Nero. He was the fifth emperor of the Roman Empire. And Nero is famous for his persecution of the Christians in Rome. Remember that whole thing about the city burning and Nero fiddling while the city burned? The city did burn. And the Christians were blamed for that. They probably didn't do it, but they were blamed for it anyway. But that was a persecution that was pretty much confined to the city of Rome. It was Trajan who expanded that persecution very pointedly against the Christians throughout the Roman Empire. There were many of these persecutions that came along during the first 200, almost 300 years of the church's existence. Most of these took shape in an order from the emperor that in order to do business or to be a citizen of Rome, you had to worship this panoply, this pantheon of gods, and you had to do it at least once a year publicly. Usually this took the form of burning incense or making a sacrifice to one of the Roman gods. And in turn, you got a piece of paper called a libellus that said, you have successfully sacrificed to God whatever it was. Congratulations, you can live for another year. Or you can do business for another year. This obviously causes a major problem for Christians because you can't do that. I mean, remember the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt have no other God but me. Well, this poses a real threat. And it is during these persecutions that periodically come along in the early history of the church that many of these church fathers were martyred, and a lot of other people were martyred as well. Okay? So that's kind of the context. I'm going to stop for just a second. How much time do I have?
You're going till about 7:25.
Okay. All right. We'll make that work. Do y'all have any questions about that? These three fathers that we've talked about here, Clement, Irenaeus, and Polycarp, are generally considered, they're called the apostolic fathers, because they were the ones that had the most direct connection to the original apostles. So do you have any questions? Sir?
I've got one. You talked about the 5 C's.
Yes.
Okay, and I think Rome's one.
Yes.
Spread out, I guess, around the Mediterranean. Were these autonomous? Did they report to Rome? Did they talk to one another? If you had a bishop that believed this, and another bishop necessarily didn't believe the same thing. I mean, communication wasn't what it was back then.
Very true. Yeah. That actually was one of the early questions that had to be satisfied in the church. Rome had the most immediate claim to being the primary see of the church because that's where Peter died. That's where he established that presence of the church. Also because it was the center of authority for the whole world. So there was a real good claim that the See of Rome would be the primary see. Now, Alexandria was a major center of trade and learning and commerce. It was Constantinople was obviously a major city. Antioch, I mean, all of these different sees at one time or another laid claim to that same level of authority. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why the church split in 1054 AD between East and West. So you have the Western Church and the Eastern Church. The West centered on Rome and the East centered on Constantinople. There are a lot of political reasons that why that happened. And as you study the development of theology and doctrine, there is, right from the beginning, a very distinct difference in some of those doctrines as they're developed. The ones that are primarily coming out of Constantinople having a very Eastern flair to them. The ones coming out of Rome having a very Western flair. And so you can kind of see the beginnings of a divide to some degree very early on. But there is one of the things that these church fathers did over and over and over again in their writings between each other and in the meetings in the church councils that they had was to continuously put forward and support the idea that as important as those other sees were, Rome continued to be the primary center, the primary see of the church. Sir?
The Eastern and the Western, when they they still recognize the Pope. There's one person, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, they don't necessarily, if you talk, are you talking about the Eastern Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church?
The Eastern Orthodox Church.
The Eastern Orthodox Church recognizes the Bishop of Rome. I'm not going to, because I don't know absolutely, I believe that recognition, in that recognition, they are recognizing that he is the leader of the Western Church, that he is as the Bishop of Rome speaks for the church. But I don't know exactly how the Pope is going to be seen in relation to okay, now the word just completely skipped my, the leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Be it the Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox or Antiochian Orthodox, and Father, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You can please do.
Those who are work with Pope, they are united. If not, they are separated.
Right. Yes.
So if they don't accept the Pope, they are separated. If they
Yes.
accepted Pope, and they are united.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think metropolitan.
Some-
That's the word I was looking
Some people
for.
don't accept the Pope. We don't want Pope as head.
Right.
So they have their own system.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be the case for the Eastern Orthodox churches. They recognize the Pope, but they're not going to see him as the head of the church universal, because they've got their own metropolitans that are their leaders. But there is a recognition, at least, that he is the Bishop of Rome. Put it that way. It works the same way with the Anglican Church. The
Yeah.
Anglican Church recognizes the Pope as the Bishop of Rome, but they don't recognize him as the head of the church. So, good question, though.
I
Sir?
think a Catholic is allowed to receive communion from what I've read at least, in Orthodox Church. But I don't think Orthodox they don't allow them to receive communion if they go to a Catholic church. That's what I've read
I think
about
that's
that.
accurate, yes. Unless, unless they're in communion with the Pope.
Unless they're Eastern Catholics.
Yeah. Eastern Catholic, yes.
Anybody who want to receive the communion first, they have the one holy apostolic church. We have the creed, they have to believe that creed. If they believe that creed, they have professed that creed. Then only they are allowed to receive the communion, because sometimes they don't believe, they cannot receive it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think if you're
Yeah.
if you're say you're in Russia somewhere and you don't have access, I think they allow it if there's not a Roman Catholic church. But I don't know.
That I don't know. Yeah, that's a tougher question. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about the first apostolic fathers we're talking about? Okay. Okay, I'm going to try to go through some of these key ones. Oh, did you have a question?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. It's okay if you do. Love questions. Except from him. He comes up with weird ones. In order to talk about the